Slum TV is a project which I together with like 4 colleagues, started in 2008. 2 Austrian artists and 2 Kenyan photographers. And the project Slum TV it's a grassroots media collective. What does that mean? It's a small group of about 20 young men and women in Mathare, which is in the east of Nairobi, a slum, basically. I'd been working there since 2004. Fred and Julius, the Kenyan photographers, are from Mathare, and Alex and Lucas, the Austrian artists, visited us, and we all shared this position that our experience of Mathare, all of our heterogeneous experiences of Mathare, had no relationship with the image that we saw or experienced of Mathare in the media. And what do I mean by the media? I mean the print media, I mean TV, and I also, quite importantly for us, mean the whole literature and film produced by the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, who are working in Mathare, because it's a slum area with poor sanitation, etc., etc. And all of these, so both the sort of the international media, the local media, and the NGO literature produced very two-dimensional images of Mathare, each with a specific interest. So if we look at the NGO section, they produce what we call the NGO aesthetic. So because that material has a specific aim. It's communicating or transmitting an image with something in mind, which is often fundraising or awareness raising, but it's justifying the NGO project. So those materials are images of suffering, of poverty. In the international press, Mathare would feature in the international press when you have violent uprising, sometimes also poverty stories. Like any neighborhood, existence is very diverse, and there's a whole wealth of experience, lived experiences, which are not transmitted by these specific representations. Our idea was to set up an organization, an infrastructure, which would train young men and women in Mathare so that they could start to author their own narratives about what's happening in Mathare. It's quite a simple idea. Of course, like, putting that simple idea into practice is not so simple. But that was the kind of the core, the essence of the project. And it's a political thing. When you're not in charge of your own image, then that's problematic. And it becomes much more complicated than that, because when the other images which are produced about you and your neighborhood, they also affect the way that you see yourself, and you assimilate those. That's why making images is a political act. Slum TV produces small documentaries, like mini documentaries, maybe between 3 and 5 minutes long, and small dramas, 10 to 15 minutes long. And they're both about local issues, basically. And they're part of what's called a newsreel. And we produce one newsreel every approximately 2 months. And then that newsreel is then projected in public space in different areas within the slum. The screenings are quite incredible experiences, because you witness, it sounds like a cliche, but you witness a community witnessing itself, and there's something quite special about that. There's generally lots of young children, and for example, when they see like a local familiar character like the school teacher, there's of course a crazy reaction, because normally I think it's quite special when you see someone you know on a screen. I think it's interesting that it's very rarely controversial. Why do I have that as a criteria? why should like screened material, why should the documentaries of Slum TV be controversial? They shouldn't necessarily be controversial, but it's just one element of the material which I've noticed that they never are. Like I said, they're generally positive perspectives, and I think that's because they are essentially a counter-narrative, and the dominant narrative, the dominant authorial narrative about Mathare is that it's not a positive place. It's a place of poverty and crime. So as a young person, if you're given a chance to make your own films, I think on some level you want to kind of counteract that. When we went around asking people, or when like the meeting opened, what should we make films about in this newsreel? For the first 6 months, you'd always have someone who put up their hand and say, I want to make a film about water and sanitation. I want to make a film about HIV/AIDS. I want to make a film about the girl child. These are obviously like important issues, massively important issues. But what struck me is that the way they're referred to is not like, I want to make a film about the river at the end of my garden because it's unswimmable. It's, I want to make a film about water and sanitation, which is adopting like the capitalized discourse of the NGO world. So it's assimilating a discourse. And not only is it assimilating a discourse, it's assimilating like a representational trope. And that for me made me think, okay, so Slum TV is actually really, really important, because all these other representations are not just being consumed by people outside of the slum, they're being consumed by people inside of the slum. And then that's of course affecting the way they perceive themselves. And then you start to see yourself as a product of poverty. And that of course has horrible implications. If we talk about the NGO aesthetic as a specific way of representing, I'm going to talk about Mathare for the moment. That's of course, you could see that as part of a bigger lineage of representations which casts Africa as a site of charity. So this is this kind of trajectory from like the colonial project and the missionaries of the colonial project. And I think that's quite a strong, I mean this notion of charity is a kind of is a constant theme in that. And if you're always casting a place as a continent, but before I talk about the continent, if you're always casting countries or places as sites of charity, then of course you're somehow making it impossible for that place to be something other than that. Of course, I mean, we're all familiar with the way that Africa is totally flattened into kind of a monolithic thing. And I think a lot of the problems which I'm talking about with reference to Mathare are probably the similar problems for the representation of the continent. Like, how can you address the whole continent without sounding banal? Because for me to be meaningful is to be specific. So that's why I'm always talking about one specific place, because that's a place that I know from the position of my subjectivity. What I'm really interested in is the way my experience of identity, and even my own identity in Nairobi, is an identity of something which is in constant process of negotiation. It's in constant change, and it's a narrative. It's a narrative that you tell other people, it's a narrative that you tell yourself, but it's mutable. But what I find really problematic, and this is just my own interest, is when you have official narratives that compress this crazy thing which we refer to as identity into like a reductive, originary thing, for want of a better word. So I'm interested also in ethnicities in Kenya. So, and in official narratives, how people are cast as their ethnicity, and there's nothing else. And for me, that doesn't bear any relationship to reality. Now in Kenya, in 2008, you had a contested election, political violence, which expressed itself along ethnic lines. Now, to understand that as ethnic violence is a reduction of the situation, it's a simplification of the situation. But certainly what happened is that ethnicity was the medium within which the violence moved. Yeah, so it wasn't the cause, but it was the medium. But still, in that context, instead of this kind of fluid thing, maybe I'm Kikuyu, maybe I'm a rapper, maybe I'm, you know, all of these things together, you became something quite specific. You became something discrete and defined and rigid. So that was a context within which gave borders to that mutable identity. So that's one example in which the broader kind of social political conditions contain your identity in a specific place. And there are others, but that's just one concrete political example I can give you.